Hey guys, tonight we begin with silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses against your chest like a hell breath. You're standing at the base of a nameless mountain in northern Persia, long before the roads had names, before empires had borders. There's no sound except the wind carving through stone and the faintest whisper of something moving that shouldn't be there. You don't know who sent you. You don't know what you're supposed to find. But you do know this. If you hear the word assassin spoken aloud, it's already too late. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not at the start of a war. You're at the beginning of a rumor. A name that has no official language, no flag, no anthem, but still makes emperors write secret letters by candlelight and double the palace guard. The mountains here aren't just physical, they're metaphorical. Between these cliffs is a place that barely exists on maps, but dominates the minds of kings. Alamut. The people who live here, they don't raise armies. They don't build cities. They operate on a completely different frequency. You're told their leader once walked into a fortress and claimed it without drawing a blade. Not through violence, through conviction. You'd shrug that off as legend. If not for the fact that every royal court from Cairo to Constantinople now dreads a letter from this place. Or worse, no letter at all. Because the thing about assassins, the real ones, is that they never tell you they're coming. You sleep in a merchant's house tonight. He locks the door from the inside, but also wedges a chair under the handle, lights 2 lamps, and ties a bell to his wrist before sleep. He says it's just tradition. You're not sure you believe that. In this world, empires flex their strength with horsemen and catapults. But you're learning that real power? It's in the fear of something you can't trace. The assassin doesn't arrive with banners or speeches. He arrives in a crowd, in the market, wearing your cousin's face. And when he strikes, it's not personal. It's surgical. Historians still argue whether this shadowy order ever really controlled territory. There's no consensus, no treaty signed, no coins minted in their name. But what they did control was subtler, human behavior. You don't need to rule a city when you can make the city's ruler flinch every time a servant leans in. And that's exactly what you feel now. That flinch. Every town you pass through on your way north tells the same story. Someone important died, and no one saw it happen. No one heard a scream. No one saw the blade. No one saw the man or woman leave. And yet everyone knows who it was. Not by sight, but by silence. You're told they call themselves Fidei, the ones who sacrifice. But no one who's used the name has lived to clarify the pronunciation. The first time you hear the name assassin, it's muttered by a soldier missing 3 fingers and a chunk of memory. He says it like a prayer you're not supposed to understand. He says the word means hashish eater, a slur, a distortion, something their enemies invented to make them seem irrational. But when you look into the eyes of a man who's seen one, it doesn't feel irrational. It feels precise. There's an old woman in a village who claims to have seen one once. She says he was handsome, didn't blink much, paid her for bread, and disappeared before she turned to make change. That's it. That's her story. And yet somehow it's terrifying. Because that's the shape of fear the assassins carved into the world. Not with battles, but with doubt. When you're never sure who's watching, you start to watch yourself. When any handshake might be the last, you hesitate. And hesitation is a poison empires can't afford. You ride further into the hills, and stories twist like the paths. Some say the assassins are mystics who meditate for days before a kill. Others say they're zealots, raised in illusions of paradise. Some swear they're ghosts. But you notice a pattern. All of these stories contradict. Which means the assassins aren't telling their own. Which means someone else is controlling the narrative. Or no one is. That's even scarier. Because when people stop explaining you and start fearing you, you win. You finally reach the mouth of a mountain pass. No road, just loose stones and burr bones. Someone hands you a slip of paper. No signature, no explanation. Just 2 words in Persian, climb quietly. You do, because now you know, this story doesn't begin with an army. It begins with a whisper, and you probably won't survive this. You wake just before dawn, boots still on, breath fogging in the thin air. The mountains around you are quiet, Not peaceful, but expectant, like they're holding something inside. Your legs ache from the climb, and your hands sting from grabbing at cold, unkind rock. But you're not thinking about that now. You're thinking about a man you haven't met, a man who seized a fortress not with swords or arrows, but with belief. His name is Hassan-i Sabbah, or maybe it isn't. Maybe that's just what people call him. You hear other names? 2. The old man of the mountain, the teacher, the heretic. Depends on who's speaking and whether they're still alive when they finish. You arrive at a high ridge and look down. There it is, Alamut. Not a towering castle like you'd imagine, but a low, unassuming line of stone tucked into the rock face like a thought half buried. You expected banners, maybe some grim, armored figures pacing ramparts, but there's only stillness. Not abandoned, just quiet, as if the fortress itself is choosing not to reveal its full shape. And that's when it hits you. This place was never meant to repel armies. It was meant to control thought. Centuries ago, Hassan-i Sabbah didn't storm Alamut. He infiltrated it, worked his way in slowly, building trust, learning the routines, identifying cracks in the leadership. Then, one day, when the moment was right, he took it. No blood, just leverage. He offered the commander a choice: leave peacefully or be removed more permanently. The man chose to leave. And just like that, a new order was born. Not one of dominion, but of discipline. Inside these walls, Hassan didn't install generals. He established teachers. He didn't stockpile weapons. He gathered texts, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy. He built not an army, but a school, a laboratory for reshaping the soul. Historians still debate whether Alamut was more monastery than military base. There's no blueprint. The Mongols burned most of it, but enough fragments remain. Stone steps leading to nowhere. Windows that let in moonlight at specific times of year. Passageways that carry whispers. The whole place seems designed not to protect bodies, but to refine minds. You pass a narrow door with a strange carving, a lion's head with a knife in its mouth. No one explains it. No one needs to. Symbols like this aren't meant to be interpreted aloud. They're meant to be felt, internalized, lived. The men here are not like soldiers. They don't shout or train in rows. They sit in circles, reading. They fast. They debate. One group discusses Plato. Another studies encrypted poetry that may or may not contain a kill order. You can't tell who's a philosopher and who's a weapon. And maybe there's no difference. Hassan believed faith without thought was blindness, but thought without sacrifice, powerless. So he fused the two. In his world, to kill was not sin. It was precision, a last resort in a moral equation with only one solution. And the people he taught, they didn't become assassins overnight. They became students first, then believers, then tools. One mainstream historical fact stands out. Hassan-i Sabbah studied in the great city of reshaped. There, he rubbed shoulders with the likes of Omar Khayyam and Nizam al-Mulk. The three were even said to be friends in youth, forming a pact to help each other rise in power. But only one of them chose the mountains. The others stayed in the courts. Hassan chose exil, and from exile, he built something stronger than a court, a network of conviction. Inside Alamut, every initiate began as a novice, silent, observant, almost monk-like. They were given no weapons at first. Only questions, only contradictions. Imagine that. You come to train for death, and the first thing you're taught is how to argue. But slowly, over months or even years, something shifts. They learn to accept silence as strategy, to see sacrifice as a form of expression. They become what Hassan calls Fido-I, not just killers, but those who give up everything. Their name, their past, even their future. There's a fringe legend you hear whispered near the kitchen fires. They say Hassan created a secret garden within the fortress, an illusion of paradise. He drugged new initiates, carry them there, let them wake in a world of beauty, music, wine, pleasure, then bring them back and tell them that was heaven, and only through obedience could they return. Historians still argue whether this false paradise ever existed. No proof, no blueprint, but the concept alone is powerful. And in a place like this, symbols often matter more than facts. You walk past a training hall where no one lifts a blade. Instead, they recite lines of ancient scripture. Each passage could be a prayer or a code. One young man turns and nods to you. His eyes are calm, too calm, like he's already made peace with dying. That's the most terrifying thing you see here. Not anger, not violence, but serenity. These aren't wild-eyed fanatics. They're tranquil, still, focused. And that's when you understand why kings fear them. Not because they kill, but because they believe. You move deeper into Alamut, and the sound of your own footsteps begins to unsettle you. Not because they echo, but because they don't. The floor seems to absorb noise. Like the walls have agreed not to repeat anything said inside them. You're starting to realize this fortress isn't just built on stone. It's built on secrets, and some of them are watching you back. The further in you go, the less the place feels like a stronghold and more like a mechanism. A system designed not just to protect, but to transform. Alamut doesn't look like much from the outside. Some towers, a few walls, nothing an empire would sweat over. But from within, it's a maze of mental reshaping. Doors that lead nowhere. Stairs that spiral and stop. Corridors where a whisper from one end can be heard perfectly at the other. You're not being led around. You're being taught to think differently. And this lesson? It's not subtle. You walk past a small alcove where a group of boys, no older than 15, sit in absolute silence, staring at a single candle. One speaks only when the flame flickers. Everything is the result of movement, he says. The others nod, and they don't speak again for the next hour. You wonder if they're being brainwashed. That's the easy explanation. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels more like they're being sharpened. One mainstream fact: Alamut was not built by Hassan. It existed long before he arrived. A relatively minor outpost perched on a mountain ledge in the Alborz range. What Hassan did was take it and repurpose it, not into a fortress of brute force, but into a philosophical weapon. You reach the central library, though library is almost misleading. This is a sanctum. There are scrolls here older than the walls themselves. Arabic, Persian, Greek, Sanskrit. You spot texts on astronomy next to treatises on ethics. Pages of mathematical formulas copied alongside forbidden religious commentaries. You start to realize this place didn't just train killers. It preserved knowledge that entire empires tried to erase. And here's the strange, quiet truth. These so-called assassins spent more time reading than fighting. No one here is training to die. They're training to understand why dying might matter. You hear the phrase again, fight ally. It doesn't translate cleanly. The one who sacrifices comes close, but doesn't quite land. Because the sacrifice isn't just life. It's selfhood. It's comfort, ego, recognition. Once someone becomes a fight ally, they're no longer a person. They are an action waiting to happen. And that's what terrifies rulers. Not that someone is trying to kill them, but that someone might, and that the person might already be standing beside them. There's a man here you meet briefly. Face wrapped in cloth. Doesn't say much. You're told he just returned from Cairo. 3 years embedded as a servant in the household of the vizier. Never broke character. Never rushed. Just waited until the timing was right. One night, he disappeared. So did the vizier. The man comes back to Alamut, offers no explanation, just returns to studying Persian poetry. No reward, no applause, just mission completed. Back to verse. Fringe detail. It said that some Fidai were trained to smile even in death. Not out of defiance, but to deliver one final message to witnesses. I did this willingly. You think that's theatrical. Then you see a mural deep in the hallway. Stone carved, barely visible, showing a man standing over a king's body, smiling as guards approach him. His arms are open, not surrendering, inviting. There's a debate among scholars, still unresolved, about how many assassins were ever active at once. Some say a few dozen. Others argue the number could have reached into the hundreds. But everyone agrees on one thing. They didn't need an army. They only needed time. Time to get close. Time to be forgotten. Time to strike. And that's where the strategy of fear emerges. Alamut didn't train people to attack. It trained them to vanish. You don't walk into a room anymore without wondering if one of them is there. You begin to question every face you've seen, every hand that's shaken yours. Because the goal isn't just death, it's doubt. You hear of one case, an emir in Baghdad who changed his sleeping quarters every night for 7 years. Ate only food prepared by blood relatives. Bathed alone. He was never attacked. No threats, no letters. Just the knowledge that if he slipped even once, someone might be waiting. That's the brilliance of Alamut's design. It doesn't need to touch you to change you. It simply makes you aware of its potential. And you start to wonder, if fear alone can alter behavior this drastically, is that not a form of power greater than swords? You step out onto a terrace at dusk. The sun hits the stone just right, and for a moment, everything is golden. You realize this place doesn't shout. It whispers, constantly. In stone, in silence, in symbols. Every hall here is a suggestion. Every ritual is a riddle. And you start to get the feeling that Alamut isn't just a fortress. It's a question, and everyone who enters becomes part of the answer. You don't expect the first assassination you hear about to feel like a parable, but that's how the story is told, slowly, deliberately, like it's been passed down around campfires, whispered in market stalls, and prayed over in royal chambers. It begins with a name, Nizam al-Mulk, Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire, architect of policy, patron of scholars, master of influence. A man so powerful, he made kings look like accessories. And then gone. No war, no uprising, no court conspiracy. Just a single stranger in a crowd during pilgrimage. One blade, one strike, a clean, practiced motion, and the man who built a dynasty dropped like a curtain. You hear the story from 3 different sources in the same day, each version with slightly different details. One says the killer was disguised as a wandering dervish. Another says he smiled as he delivered the final blow. Yet all 3 agree on one thing. The killer made no attempt to escape. He died on the spot, smiling. That wasn't just an execution. That was a statement. One that cracked open an empire and reminded every ruler watching, you are not untouchable. You look around the stone chambers of Alamut again and understand something new. This place isn't just a factory for quiet killers. It's an amplifier. One small act, carefully timed, amplified through rumor and fear, and suddenly an entire region goes still. Nobles cancel appearances. Sultans inspect their food. Advisors start wearing armor beneath their robes. You don't need to strike everyone. You just need them all to believe they might be next. Mainstream history confirms what you're seeing. Nizam's death in 1092 sent political shockwaves through the Seljuk world. He was more than a bureaucrat. He was the glue. And when that glue was ripped out, the empire splintered. Not by revolution, by suggestion. From here, the story accelerates. Assassinations start appearing like punctuation marks in the histories of kings. A governor found dead on his prayer mat. A preacher silenced mid-sermon. A general bleeding out in the courtyard, surrounded by his own guards. And the strange thing? These kills weren't done in the shadows. Many happened in broad daylight, in marketplaces, on holy ground, some in the middle of crowds, as if to say, look, this can happen anywhere, to anyone. Freeing it detail. There are records of rulers sending tribute to the assassins. Gold, horses, manuscripts, even rare perfumes. Not bribes exactly, more like insurance policies. The kind that come with no paperwork, only silence. You imagine being a ruler in this time. Every day is a roll of the dice. You look at your wine and wonder if it's safe. You trust your guards, but only just. You think about your son. Is he loyal? Or has he already made a deal? You start to see how Alamut's power grew without growing. No new territories, no conquered cities, just reputation, sharpened with every body that fell in public view and every blade that was never found. You hear of a particular case, Conrad of Montferrat, newly elected king of Jerusalem. The man had just received his crown when 2 strangers approached him in a narrow street, and, just like that, ended his reign before it began. Eyewitnesses say they didn't flee. They stood still, waiting to be cut down. One even whispered something in a language no one recognized. and then gone. Just like that. A king dead. A message sent. And nobody quite sure what that message was. That's the unsettling part. The assassins didn't always kill enemies. Sometimes they eliminated potential allies. And because no one could figure it out, the fear only deepened. Kings began to wonder, I even the intended target? Or am I just an example? One by one, rulers started avoiding confrontations with the order. Armies were rerouted. Investigations quietly dropped. Instead of fighting back, power began to fold inward. Not out of weakness, but paralysis. And in that paralysis, Alamut thrived. You watch as this fortress, barely visible on any map, begins to shape world events simply by existing. It's not the assassinations themselves, it's the aftermath. The meetings canceled, the laws delayed, the alliances never formed. It's the sound of power hesitating. And that's what Hassan built better than any army, a machine of uncertainty. You sit alone at night, near one of the observation towers. The stars are absurdly clear. No clouds, no noise, just that razor-thin wind threading through the mountains. You think back to Nizam al-Mulk, a man whose name filled scrolls, who shaped the very language of law in his time, all undone by one stranger in 1 second. That's the alchemy you've stepped into, the transformation of one act into an empire's undoing. And now, whenever you see a candle flicker near a throne, you'll know why someone flinched. By now, you've stopped asking where the assassins are. You started asking if they were ever truly there to begin with. Because everywhere you go, whether it's a palace, a shrine, or a crumbling roadside inn, the answer is the same. No one saw anything. And yet, everyone is afraid. You begin to understand the real genius of this order wasn't its knives, it was its invisibility. Fear without footprints. You meet a merchant on the road to Ray, someone who swears he once served a nobleman marked for death. The nobleman was found with a blade in his throat and no sign of a break-in. Just a slip of cloth left on the windowsill. Folded, white, untouched. The merchant hasn't slept through the night since. You ask how the assassin got in. He doesn't answer, just shrugs and mutters. He was already there. That's when it starts to click. The true power of this group wasn't just infiltration. It was anticipation. They didn't force their way into the world's most secure places. They became part of them. Slowly, patiently, like moisture in stone. One well-placed fighter, trained to serve tea or clean the floors, could wait years for the perfect moment. Not for opportunity, but for meaning. Their kills weren't just tactical, they were poetic. Historians still argue whether the assassins had a centralized system of command. Some believe every strike was ordered directly from Alamut. Others argue the opposite, that after training, a fighter operated autonomously, guided not by orders, but by doctrine. And that's the part that unnerves you. They may not have needed direction. They simply understood what to do. You pass through a town where no one will say the word assassin. They call them the quiet ones, or the watchers. And you notice something odd. Every household here has their doors chained from the inside. Not bolted, chained. It makes no practical sense. But you realize it's not for protection. It's ritual, a habit passed down to feel safer. And like most rituals, its power lies in what it suggests. You hear a local story, a failed assassination attempt on a regional emir. The assassin was caught, imprisoned, and interrogated. He never spoke, not even under torture. When he finally died, guards found a thin scrap of paper hidden in his robes. A single symbol, a circle inside a triangle. No one knew what it meant, and that made it worse. Because when you don't know what a symbol is, it starts to mean everything. You pass a village with a crumbling minaret. A young boy points to a crack in its foundation and tells you. That's where they watched. No one corrects him. You're starting to notice how paranoia behaves. Like a vine, it clings to places where answers don't grow. The assassins didn't need to leave messages. They became the message. Their silence filled every absence, every locked room, every closed curtain. There's a mainstream historical fact worth holding on to. The assassins operated for nearly 2 centuries without being eradicated. Not because they were too strong, but because they were too small, too quiet, A handful of dedicated believers scattered across the Middle East, invisible in the chaos of war and politics. No borders, no cities, just purpose. It's that minimalism that drives kings mad. You listen to a legend about a prince who paid a servant to taste all his food. Then the taster dropped dead, and the prince didn't eat again for 3 days. He thought it was the food, but he was wrong. It was the cup. The servant drank from his own hand. The poison was in the glaze. No one knows if that story's true, but it doesn't need to be. The effect is real. You drink more carefully after hearing it. Fringe detail, in some rare cases, but by leaving a gate unlocked, a servant reassigned, a guard dismissed. The blade wasn't always physical. Sometimes it was procedural. You begin to understand that the real legacy of Alamut was not just death. It was hesitation, a pause inserted into every decision, a second thought that weakened the first. The assassins didn't win by brute force. They won by creating the possibility of loss. Everywhere, all the time. That's what made them so enduring. Their enemies didn't just die. They doubted themselves first. You visit a ruined watchtower once used by the Seljuks. Its walls are covered in graffiti, some old, some new. One phrase repeats itself, scratched in different hands. He was here before me. You don't know who he is. Maybe no one does. Maybe that's the point. Because when you make fear impersonal, it spreads faster. When no one knows who to blame, everyone becomes suspicious. And when fear becomes structure, you don't need to strike again. The world will do the rest for you. You don't remember exactly when you stopped seeing the assassins as murderers. Maybe it was somewhere between the library filled with forbidden texts and the tea ceremony that ended with no word spoken. Maybe it was the boy who smiled at you with eyes too ancient for his age. Or maybe it's now, staring at the training yard where no one is training to fight. They're training to blend. This isn't a barracks. It's theater. You watch as a student rehearses limping, then coughing, then pretending to be blind. Another group is practicing carrying water jugs as if they've done it their whole lives. No one is sparring, but everyone is perfecting presence. The ability to disappear by becoming background. And that's when you realize something crucial. Assassination, for them, isn't the hard part. Getting close is. A fringe detail you overhear in passing. New recruits aren't assigned identities. They build them, brick by brick. One student lived as a tailor's apprentice for 5 years before being reassigned. He never made a kill. He just observed, mapped the town, and knew who to bribe if the day came. You see now that Alamut trains for the long game. Every kill is just a punctuation mark in a sentence years in the making. You sit with a teacher in the archives, an old man with missing teeth and a gaze that could peel bark off a tree. He tells you the story of a man who served for over a decade in the Seljuk court, rose to become a trusted advisor, managed money, suggested treaties. Then, one afternoon over tea, he slit his superior's throat and calmly returned to his chair. The body slumped. The man did not move, and when the guards arrived, he only asked if they'd like another cup. There's a mainstream historical fact buried in that story. Western records do speak of an assassination just like this. Undeniably orchestrated, untraceable until the final breath. The killer was captured, yes, but he offered no defense. Just silence. Some say that assassin's name was never even known, because names don't matter when you're already gone. This is where the true terror begins, not in the blade, but in the years before it. In the possibility that the man bringing you dinner, the one you've laughed with, trusted, maybe even loved, is waiting, not to strike when you're weak, but when the story is perfect. One of the instructors tells you, the kill means nothing if it doesn't say something. It's not murder, it's messaging. That's why assassins strike in churches, mosques, marketplaces, not to be brutal, but to be remembered. You hear whispers of infiltrations that didn't end in death, of assassins who lived as priests, scholars, and merchants just to spread rumors. See division, delay a battle. They didn't need to kill. They needed to tilt the world just enough. And what's unsettling is how easy it was. Fringe story. A monk in Antioch was revered for his insights, sermons, and healing work. When he died, A scroll was found under his bed, written in Persian, encoded, sealed with a mark of Alamut. He'd never killed a soul, but he'd sent 19 messages to Alamut. Each one shifted a local alliance. No one knew, until it was too late. Historians still argue whether these agents were truly autonomous. Were they operating under a central will, or had they internalized the ideology so deeply that they acted on instinct? You lean toward the latter, because here's the scary part. The best trained Fidei didn't wait for orders. They became the order, a living function of Alamut's mind. And what kind of enemy is that? One that doesn't need direction. One that believes timing is more powerful than numbers. In the courtyard, someone's drawing diagrams in the sand, geometry. Circles intersecting lines. You ask what it is. He tells you it's the shape of patience. You ask no further. You learn that many Fidei weren't even trained to survive the mission. That was never the point. Once the act was complete, they surrendered, or stood still, or knelt in prayer. Not because they lacked escape routes, but because their work was done. And that's the most unnerving part. They never run. Running implies guilt, or doubt. The assassin never doubts. You pass a stone hallway where every torch is spaced exactly 12 paces apart. No more, no less. You're told it's symbolic, of balance, of awareness. But maybe it's also practical, because here, even the light is disciplined. There's a legend told only among the elder instructors. A man who waited 19 years to complete his mission, became a monk, then a counselor, then an architect. Finally, one day, he constructed a balcony that collapsed under a specific target at exactly the right moment. Then he vanished. No blade, no trace, just gravity and intent. You walk alone that night and feel watched. Not threatened, just observed. Like someone's measuring your patience. That's when it hits you. These people don't kill to win wars. They kill to end sentences, to shape memory, the way a sculptor chips at marble. Slowly, quietly, with purpose. You remember the teacher's words. The blade is the least important part of the mission. He meant it. You're led to a lower chamber beneath the library, carved deep into the rock, where the air is colder and the torches burn bluer. There are no guards here, no locks, just silence so thick you feel it press against your skin. And here, in the middle of the dimness, you meet her. Not a warrior, not a priestess, just a woman in gray robes, seated beside a table scattered with dried herbs, ink, and old bone scroll handles. She doesn't look up when you enter. She's sorting petals by color. You're told her name once meant keeper, but no one speaks it now. You've heard nothing about women in Alamut's tales. That's the thing. There are no famous female assassins, no memorials, no martyr songs. But here, in this stone belly of the fortress, it becomes clear they were never meant to be seen. They were meant to remain. You sit in silence for a while. The woman finally speaks, not to you, but to the herbs, the bitter ones mask poison best. That's your first lesson. Fringe stories come back to you now. The legends of the librarian who memorized entire maps, of the healer who brewed antidotes and toxins from the same roots, of the quiet midwife who passed information under the guise of cradle songs. These weren't assassins. They were architects. You begin to see the structure differently. The men were the blades, but the women? They were the hands that aimed them. One mainstream historical detail helps ground the myth. While the records rarely name them, women in the Ismaili community, especially within Alamut, had access to education. Medicine, philosophy, languages, even code work. In a time when most women were legally invisible, the women here were curators of hidden power. You meet a scribe who shows you a room full of blank parchment. We don't write things down, he says, unless it's time to forget them. But you notice the stacks are filed in a pattern only someone with a trained eye might spot. Missing letters, inverted symbols, odd spacing. This is a library of invisible text, and it's likely she, the woman in gray, is the one who organized it. There's a story she tells you in fragments about a Fidei who entered a nobleman's household disguised as a new wife. She lived in his home for months, watched his habits, nursed his illnesses, waited, and when the moment came, She didn't use a dagger. She served a bowl of figs. Only one was soaked in a tincture. He died the next morning. The family mourned. No one questioned her. She left that same night, barefoot and unseen. Historians still argue whether female operatives were formally trained or acted independently. But when you listen to the way the gray-robed woman speaks, measured, without ornament, you begin to believe something else entirely. They were never in the records because they chose not to be. You're told of the archivist, a woman who never left the fortress yet knew the movement of every courier. She never issued a command, never attended a council. But the guards all paused when she walked by, just enough to mark respect or fear. You ask the old scribe if she held rank. He just smiles and replies, "In Alamut, the highest position is the one no one names." That's the lesson here. Visibility is weakness. These women didn't want thrones. They wanted control over information, over perception, and in that, they mastered the art of not being noticed. There's another chamber below, off limits to most. A storage of dried seeds, medicinal powders, and faintly glowing oils. You're allowed to see it, but not to speak. A younger woman guides you with gestures, points to a wax-sealed jar with black roots inside. You realize, slowly, that you've stumbled into the heart of something deeper than tactics. You found the ritualists. While men out there train to strike, the women here train for subtlety. You see them crushing stones into ink, folding coded verses into fabric, weaving knots that mean wait, or go, or kill. Their weapons are symbols. Their battlefield is belief. Freeing detail. Some oral accounts from mountain villages claim that during times of siege, it was the women who decided whether the fortress would burn its archives or hide them. Not the commanders, the keepers. You see now how the assassins endured. Because while the world watched the men who died for the mission, it never saw the women who kept it alive. The gray-robed woman looks at you one last time and says, "You don't teach someone how to disappear. You teach them why it matters." She then returns to her sorting, placing yellow petals in one bowl, red in another. A signal, perhaps. You leave quietly, heart slower, breath held longer. Understanding now that for all the stories told of blades in the dark, the sharpest ones were never drawn. You descend from the women's quarters with something new in your bones. The understanding that power doesn't always knock. Sometimes it watches. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it sends a flower instead of sword. But now you find yourself in a very different part of Alamut. The council hall. There are no thrones here. No bod. No ceremonial weapons. Just a low table, smooth from use, and cushions worn down into the floor. It's a room built for decisions, quiet, irreversible ones. The kind that make empires tremble. This is where letters were once written. You're told, not threats, warnings, not to cities, but to people. One name per scroll. No signature, just a sentence. A message clear enough to skip translation. We see you. You sit where Fidai once sat. He was young, they say, no more than 20. He had trained for 6 years, learned 3 languages, studied the patterns of a Persian emir's guards until he could draw them from memory. And then he asked not to go. Not because he was afraid, because he thought it was the wrong time. He waited another 2 years, then went, and didn't return. Historians record this era as one of cautious diplomacy. Letters passed in code, tokens exchanged for silence. There were no treaties, no official documents, but rulers sent gifts anyway. Not to praise, not even to appease, to survive. You find records of kings who built entire wings of their palaces for no other reason than to escape routine. One sultan had 4 bedrooms, slept in a different one each night, ate in none. His meals were brought to random corners of the palace, guarded by 3 men, each of whom was assigned by a different mother. That's what fear does. It multiplies variables. It scrambles patterns. It forces power to contort itself just to feel safe. And the assassins didn't need to kill that king. They already won the moment he stopped living like one. There's a mainstream account that drives the point home. In 1192, after being elected king of Jerusalem, Conrad of Montferrat was killed by 2 men in the street. Not in battle, not during a siege, just stabbed, mid-step. They didn't flee. They stood still, waiting for capture. And when one of them was struck down, the other whispered something in an unknown tone. Even now, no one knows what he said, but everyone remembers how he said it, without fear, without regret. And that, you realize, is the assassin's sharpest edge. Not the blade, but the absence of panic. It cuts deeper. Fringe detail. There's a lesser-known account of a ruler who, desperate for peace, sent a chess set to Alamut. Handmade, inlaid with silver. The message was simple. I don't want to play. The board was returned. One piece missing. The king resigned within a month. That's the level of psychological precision at work here. Every gesture calibrated. Each silence weaponized. You start to feel in your own body now. A hesitation in every movement. A thought before every word. Alamut has worked its magic on you too. Because fear is never just about dying. It's about not knowing when, or why, or even who. You listen to a soldier tell a story about the cupbearer to a sultan. Trusted for years. A quiet man. Always present, never intrusive. Then one day, during a banquet, he drops dead before the wine is poured. They find a note on him. This hand was not ready. No one sleeps well that night. No poison. No dagger. Just a reminder, someone was close. Close enough to end it all. And chose not to. You begin to grasp the brilliance of the Order's strategy. They didn't create chaos. They let you do that to yourself. They made paranoia into a foreign policy. You imagine a court meeting where every advisor looks at the others with suspicion. A commander dismisses his most loyal officer. A judge halts a conviction. A priest rewords his sermon just slightly. All because of a rumor that someone from Alamut might be listening. And that's the thing. They always might be. In this section of the fortress, you find something unexpected. Letters never sent. Messages written to rulers, but never delivered. Some end with too soon. Others, not yet. One, you notice, has only a single word on it. Enough. It was never mailed. You ask a scribe why. He shrugs. Sometimes fear burns better unwritten. And that's the assassin's legacy in this moment. Not destruction, but hesitation. Deliberate, calculated uncertainty. Because when a king fears his cook, his guard, his son, he no longer rules. He reacts, and the world tilts. You wake before sunrise and find the fortress already humming. Not with sound, but with intent. The sun hasn't yet touched the eastern ridges, but Alamut is alive in the dark. Quiet footsteps along stone corridors. A low murmur of verses being recited in the library. The scrape of a whetstone somewhere far below. And above it all, the same stillness that now lives in your chest. You're different than when you arrived. Less certain, more aware. You catch yourself checking shadows, listening for footsteps that aren't there. You've never been attacked, never even threatened. But somehow, you feel marked. That's how it starts, they say. You're shown to a high tower, where a small group gathers before a blank wall. A teacher draws a circle in chalk, then a square around it, then a diagonal line, slashing through both. He doesn't speak. No one does. You watch the shapes sit there in the silence like an unresolved thought. And then the lesson ends. You don't know what it meant. You're not supposed to. Alamut doesn't teach answers. It teaches doubt, the kind that takes root and grows in silence. You're beginning to understand why scholars still argue about whether the Order of Assassins had a hierarchy at all. Was there truly a chain of command, or did belief itself become the command? There's no consensus. Some documents speak of captains, emissaries, layers of initiation. Others imply it was all fluid. Whispers pass from one dedicated mind to another like a contagion. The truth is, Alamut probably wasn't one thing at all. It was many, and that's why it worked. You watch a trainee complete a strange ritual, walking backward in slow circles, reciting the names of stars. It looks ridiculous, until you notice every movement is choreographed, deliberate, like a performance only one person was invited to understand. You learn he's been doing this for 2 years. It's not about the stars. It's about obedience, about discipline so complete that even nonsense becomes sacred. Mainstream historians often dismiss the order as a terrorist cult, fixating on the assassinations and ignoring the infrastructure of faith that made those actions possible. But you're beginning to see that the kill was the result, not the goal. The goal was transformation of the self, of the target, of the world. You walk through the Hall of Names, a corridor with no plaques, no faces, just columns with small nicks carved into them. Each nick is identical. Same length, same depth. You're told each one marks a completed mission. There are hundreds. You ask for the names of those responsible. The guide only says, they were all called the same thing. Fidei. No further clarification. You think back to the idea of paradise, those legends you've heard of recruits being drugged, transported to a garden of impossible beauty, and then told they could return if they obeyed. It sounds fantastical, a myth built by fearful enemies. And yet, some details are suspiciously consistent. Fragrant gardens, fountains of wine, women dressed in silk who vanish at dawn. Historians still argue whether this false paradise was real or psychological. Some believe it was theatrical, a constructed illusion to motivate loyalty. Others think it was metaphorical. But maybe, just maybe, it doesn't matter. Because what motivates someone to die for an idea doesn't have to be true. It only has to be real to them. And when you start from that point, the rest falls into place. You're brought to the messenger's stairwell, a winding, narrow column carved straight through the mountain. No windows. One candle every 20 steps. It was used by only one type of person, the runner. These weren't warriors. They were memory. They carried instructions verbally, sometimes across hundreds of miles, with no written backup. Just recitation. One breath. One purpose. The stories say that if a runner was captured, they bit off their own tongue before speaking. You ask if that's true. The guide shrugs. No one's sure, but every court feared it. Fringe tale. One runner was captured near Aleppo, tortured for days, said nothing. When he finally died, they opened his mouth and found two tiny tablets hidden under his tongue, each bearing a symbol, a key to a cipher that, to this day, no one's cracked. You begin to realize the structure of the order isn't military. It's narrative. They built not with stone and mortar, but with myth and discipline and carefully curated whispers. And the only requirement you leave the tower behind, legs stiff, head full. The wind has picked up, thin and sharp like it's trying to slice through your thoughts. Alamut from up here looks smaller than it feels. Just another pile of stone clinging to a cliff. But inside you it's grown vast. You carry more than memory now. You carry weight. They take you down again. Not to another library or ritual chamber, but to the stables. You're confused at first. You didn't think assassins had horses. Turns out, they didn't need many. Just enough to carry messages. Or disappear. Or appear in places where no one expected them. And there's something poetic about it. These agents of silence. These masters of invisibility. Still depending on the hooves of a horse. Flesh and bone. Dust and muscle. You meet a man named Perviz, maybe 50, who tends the animals. Says he's never left the mountain. Doesn't want to. His job isn't glamorous, but he's proud of it. They can't deliver death, he says, patting a gray mare's flank, if they can't get there. He shows you a saddlebag packed with compartments. Hidden sleeves, false bottoms, flaps that can be sealed with resin to stay dry in a river crossing. You realize something. This is a different kind of weapon. Fringe detail. Some horses were trained not just for speed, but for silence. Their shoes were padded, their breathing conditioned. One tale claims a Fidei rode through the gardens of a palace without waking a single dog. Perviz says the animals know things before people do, that they sense hesitation, fear, even loyalty. He tells you there was once a horse who refused to let an assassin mount. That assassin was later revealed to be a Seljuk spy, planted among the initiates. You ask if that story's true. He only smiles. Mainstream historians often overlook the logistical side of the order. They fixate on the kills, the politics, the religious philosophy. But someone had to feed the network. House the runners. Bury the dead. And that's what this place was, in part, a self-contained society. Not just soldiers and sages, but farmers, cooks, weavers, mapmakers, all bound by the same quiet devotion. It wasn't just about dying for the cause. It was about living for it, too. You sit by a fire in the outer courtyard. One of the cooks offers you something warm, a flatbread folded with herbs. You accept. He doesn't ask who you are or why you're here. That's the rule in Alamut. You never ask what someone's doing. If they're here, they have a reason. A young girl passes by, carrying a bucket of water. Maybe 10 years old, maybe younger. She's barefoot, but her feet don't flinch on the cold stone. Someone says she's memorized 100 verses already. She'll begin language training soon. You wonder what she'll become. A killer? A healer? A whisper? No one could say, because here, roles aren't assigned. They emerge. You hear a legend from the northern hills. During a harsh winter, an entire caravan vanished. Months later, one of the camels returned. Tied to its saddle was a book written in 5 languages, and a single page with the assassin's emblem. No one ever found the bodies. You ask if this is true. Of course, no one knows. But the caravan route changed the next year, and never changed back. That's how these stories work. They're not proof. They're pressure. Every ruler, merchant, general, whether they believe the tales or not, adjusts because of them. And that's all Alamut ever needed. You walk past a small garden. Not the rumored paradise. Just a simple plot of earth and stone. Someone's planted figs and onions. Maybe mint. You ask why. A nearby elder answers. Every blade needs soil. You laugh, thinking it's a metaphor. He doesn't laugh back. So maybe it's not. You're starting to see the layers now. The blades, the books, the bodies, they're all just surfaces. What's underneath is intention. And deeper still, a belief system built like an onion, wrapped in secrecy, impossible to explain unless you peel it. And when you do, your eyes water. That's the emotional core of the assassin's mystery. Not just how they struck, but why people still believe in them. Because even now, centuries later, the phrase "old man of the mountain" sends a chill down spines. His name lingers. Like smoke in a room no one remembers burning. Historians still argue about his final years. Did Hassan-i Sabbah die in Alamut, quietly watching over his students? Did he write one last manifesto? Or did he vanish, slipping away like a final parable? No tomb has ever been confirmed. No remains identified. Just silence. The most consistent legacy of all. You watch the sun set over the fortress, gold light bleeding into stone. The valley below grows soft and undefined. And in that moment, you understand something that wasn't in the scrolls. It's not about the kill. It never was. It's about the pause that comes after. The silence that makes the world listen. Night again, and Alamut hums like a distant thought. The stars are viciously bright, cold pinpricks punched into black silk. You can hear the faint rattle of wind slipping between slits in the tower walls, and below, the occasional rustle of cloth as someone moves unseen. This time, you're led not by a guide, but by a boy who says nothing and walks too fast. He brings you to what looks like a shrine, but there are no icons here, no lumps, just a low basin of water, still as glass, and a single chair facing it. You sit and wait. After a time, a voice begins behind you, low, gravelly, measured like dripping water. He tells you that tonight, you will not learn about death. You will learn about timing. He begins with a date, 1192. You already know the story. Conrad of Montferrat stabbed in the street, killers captured, the world left reeling. But the man adds something new. He says the plan to kill Conrad wasn't born in anger. It was born in calculation. Months of observation, years of resentment. But the blade only moved once all other paths had failed. And that is the secret he wants you to hear. The blade is not the first tool. It is the last. Mainstream historians often reduce the assassins to violence. But in truth, they wielded restraint like a weapon. The voice tells you the time a kill was called off after 3 years of planning, because the target humbled himself in public and stepped down. No pride, no rebellion, just silence. And so, the kill was unnecessary. Mercy? No, it wasn't about kindness. It was about message. You begin to realize how rare that discipline is. In most courts, power is eager. It wants to be seen, heard, feared. But here, power waits, listens, lets the world turn until it leans too far and then gives it a push. The voice tells another story, this one less famous. A tax collector in a desert province. Corrupt, cruel, feared by everyone. Alamut watched him for 6 years. Then, instead of sending a killer, they sent a letter. No threat, just a parable about a fig tree that bore bitter fruit. A week later, the man drowned in his own fountain. Alone, no assassin was ever found. But the message was clear, you knew what you were doing. Fringe detail. In a Persian folktale, an assassin is said to have waited inside a well for 2 days, submerged up to his nose, just to be beneath the feet of his target. He never made the kill. When asked why, he simply said the prayer he spoke changed the blade's direction. Was that real? Unlikely. But again, it doesn't need to be, because timing is everything in stories like these. You're told of kings who delayed invasions because a certain bird landed on a certain window at a certain hour. Not superstition, just fear draped in metaphor. If the assassins were out there, the world needed to pause. Historians still argue whether the order believed in divine fate or cold strategy. The answer, it seems, was both. Because once you believe your actions have cosmic consequence, timing becomes sacred. The voice stops speaking. You turn to look behind you, but the chair is empty. You don't know how long you were there. In the basin, your reflection wavers. You realize you're breathing slower. You feel like a knife being kept in its sheath. You step outside into the open air again and look down into the valley. Nothing moves. Nothing needs to. The silence is doing all the work. That's what makes the assassins different from every other faction of their time. The Crusaders had numbers. The Mongols had horses. The Caliphates had scripture. But Alamut had patience. And patience bends the spine more than steel ever could. You walk past a small engraving in the stone. Faint, almost invisible. A single word carved in Persian. Sabr. Patience. A child passes by, humming softly to herself. She's holding a sealed scroll. Not a blade. Not a map. Just knowledge. And maybe that's the point. This fortress didn't survive for centuries because it killed its enemies. It survived because it outweighed them. One by one, they died, crumbled, vanished, until all that was left was the silence of the mountain, and the question that always remains. When will the next blade move? You wake to shouting, not a panic but a practice. The courtyard is full now. Trainees repeating moves in tight spirals, scholars rehearsing memory drills aloud. Even the birds seem trained, perching on the walls in unnerving symmetry. Alamut doesn't sleep, it rehearses. Today, though, there's tension. The elders speak low. Couriers move faster. There's word of an army, Mongols, moving west. You've seen maps. You know what they're capable of. But no one panics, because Alamut has faced destruction before, and it always calculates before it crumbles. You're shown an archive room beneath the fortress, far beneath, deeper than you've gone before. Here, the walls are warm from the mountain's belly. The shelves are packed with scrolls not of kills or targets, but of plans, escape routes, burn orders, pre-coded messages for when contact is lost. They call this the Second Garden, not a place of beauty, a place of preservation. You find one scroll titled, If Alamut Falls. The date suggests it was written before Hassan-i Sabbah's death. You realize something. This fortress was never meant to last forever, but its idea was. That's the key. Mainstream history confirms the Mongols eventually came. Hulagu Khan, with a force large enough to crush cities into dust. They surrounded Alamut in 1256, laid siege, and after months, the fortress fell. You'd expect the story to end there, but it doesn't, because the Mongols found no great vault of weapons. No triasure, no leaders to parade, just stone, paper, silence. What they did destroy was the structure. What they didn't destroy was the system, because by then, it was already elsewhere. Whispers in Cairo, echoes in Damascus. The ideology had moved on like breath. Fringe detail. A surviving monk in Syria wrote that decades after Alamut fell, a letter arrived on his doorstep with the emblem of the order, despite the fortress being gone. It simply read, "We remain." No one claimed it. That's the trick. The assassins didn't tie their survival to geography. They tied it to myth. You see signs of that here in the final weeks. Archives burned, not in panic, but in sequence. Messages encoded into songs. Final instructions not shouted, but sung through courtyards so only the trained could decode them. One document, half burnt, kept behind glass, bears a chilling command. Scatter, but never end. You walk the ramparts and imagine being here when the sky turned black with arrows. The ground shuddering, the air full of screams from miles away. And still, someone here chose to stay behind, to light the last fire, to erase the last names, to lock the last doors. Historians still debate how much of Alamut's knowledge was lost. Some say almost everything. Others believe it was seeded across the Islamic world in fragments. Students who became teachers who became echoes. What's certain is that the fall of Alamut didn't erase its effect. In fact, it amplified it, because now the order wasn't just secret, it was legend. You meet an old woman who claims her grandmother spoke of a prayer taught to her in childhood. 7 syllables. Always whispered. It was meant to calm the heart. But its last line? An anagram for the word Fidai. Coincidence? Probably. But that's the assassin's great magic. Even coincidence feels planned. You stare down at the cracked stone near the outer gate, where some say the last master of Alamut stood, arms outstretched, as the fortress burned behind him. Not in surrender, in completion, because this wasn't a kingdom. It was a message, a sentence that had reached its period. And you realize something. The Order didn't build Alamut to last forever. They built it to end well. You walk through the ashes, not metaphorical ones, real ones. The room you enter smells of scorched wood and iron filings. This was once the scriptorium. Now it's blackened. Bones of shelves poking out like ribs. But the fire didn't consume everything. On a stone slab near the far wall, someone etched a word after the flames died. Remember. Just that. Nothing more. And here's where the story begins to twist. Because now, you're no longer inside Alamut as it lived, but inside what it left behind. You're standing in legacy now. The Mongols burned the body. But the ghost? It's scattered. You find it first in language. The word assassin starts appearing in European texts. Mangled, misunderstood, and yet sticky. The French write it as assassin. The Italians turn it into assassino. And the English? Well, they make it eternal. Mainstream scholars trace the modern term assassin to these very men, the Fidai of Alamut. But here's the irony. The meaning gets warped. It becomes synonymous with murderer, not martyr. Precision becomes chaos. Philosophy becomes madness. But that distortion, it spreads faster than the truth ever could. The Crusaders, terrified and confused, begin telling wild stories. The assassins drug their agents. They summon illusions. They vanish like smoke. None of it proven. All of it repeated. You read a knight's diary from 1202. He writes, "They strike in daylight, smile at the blade, and vanish into the bones of the mountain." No evidence. No name. Just fear preserved in ink. And from there, the myth metastasizes. You find it in Dante's Inferno, where assassins are punished in the same circle as traitors. You see it in the court of Richard the Lionheart, who supposedly received a dagger and a note one morning and canceled an invasion by lunch. Fringe detail. One European text refers to the men of the Black Garden, describing their ability to stop time with one stare. This was likely a poetic reference to the Order's control over fear, but it became canon in medieval drama. And that's the next phase of the Order's journey. From fact to fiction, from terror to trope, the ghost of Alamut becomes a character. An archetype, the hooded killer, the lone blade, the quiet oath. And from this soil, 1,000 stories grow. You hear about operas written in 17th century France featuring secret brotherhoods. Plays in Elizabethan England where a dagger in the dark solves every political problem. And later, pulp novels. spy thrillers, even comic books. The assassin becomes romantic, cool, stylized, and yet always rooted in that one truth: fear without footsteps. You begin to see that what the assassins built was more than just a system of control. They built a mythic template, something that survives even when the names fade. One mainstream example: the Hashishin appear in Marco Polo's writings. He describes a secret garden, a mystical figure called the Old Man, and a rite of passage involving paradise and obedience. Scholars argue over how much of this is real. Some say Marco never even visited Alamut, but that's not the point. The idea of the order had already become global. And once an idea reaches that level, you can't kill it by burning a building. You find traces in the East as well. Persian poems referencing the one who smiles before the strike. A chess variation in northern India with a piece called the Silent Rider. Coincidence? Maybe. But remember, coincidence bends around myth like light around gravity. There's even a fringe theory that an offshoot of the order resurfaced centuries later in the Mughal court, posing as Sufi mystics, influencing tax reform from behind closed doors. No evidence, just a whisper, just enough to make a historian lose sleep. You sit beneath a cedar tree near the ruins and feel the echo. Not sound, an idea. And that's the assassin's last weapon. Not the blade, not the poison, the story. Because once the world believes you never truly die, you don't have to show up again. You just have to wait for someone to say your name. And they always do. You stand in front of a screen, not a stone wall, not parchment, a digital screen, flickering blue light across your face. And for the first time in this journey, the ancient story slips its hood and steps into now. Because somehow, impossibly, the assassins are still here. Not in body, but in blueprints. You scroll through the headlines. Precision killings, lone attackers, surgical operations that change policy more than warfare ever could. You read about encrypted channels, groups with no clear leaders, networks that operate like ideas, not armies. And suddenly, Alamut doesn't feel distant. It feels familiar. Mainstream analysts use different words now: cell-based organization, asymmetrical threat, ideological radicalization. But you know the structure. You've walked it. This is the assassin's model, just updated for fiber optics and firewalls. A man appears on a news segment, discussing leaderless movements. He says they function like myths. You can't trace them to one person. You nod, because you've seen what myth can do. There's a case study you find, a coordinated attack across 3 countries, executed within the same hour. No official claims, no clear motive, just precision and timing. The kind of timing only taught by someone who once waited 13 years to strike. Fringe detail: in 2007, a USB stick was recovered in a failed operation in Europe. Inside were scanned fragments of handwritten notes in Persian, including the phrase, "The blade is not the mission. The silence is." No organization took credit. The files vanished from the media within days. Historians still argue whether modern groups consciously follow the assassin's model or if it's simply convergent evolution, when the demands of secrecy and symbolism create the same structures again and again. But deep down, you suspect it's something else. Legacy, unspoken. You meet a professor who tracks ideological movements. She tells you the most dangerous systems aren't the ones that survive through hierarchy. They're the ones that survive through story. And that's what the Order left behind. A story that rewrites itself every generation. You dive deeper. Anonymous manifestos echoing the voice of Sabbah. Hacker groups invoking medieval iconography. Even fiction, novels, games, films, all recycling the myth. In one of them, the Order is now global. Hooded, yes, but digital. Networked. Enigmatic. And somehow, the fiction feels like prophecy. You watch a scene where a modern assassin walks through a crowd and is invisible. No magic, just awareness, patience, intent. And you smile because that's real. That's what you saw in Alamut. A teenager learning to serve tea before they learn to strike. Because control of the self is the mission. You think about that little girl with the water bucket, now probably grown, maybe forgotten by time, unless she became something else. A thought passed down, a mentor, a whisper, and in that moment you wonder, how many modern voices carry Alamut without knowing? It doesn't take much. A line of code, a message with no name, an act that reshapes a government. And when people ask who planned this, the answer is always the same. We don't know, but you do, because you've seen the shape before, the pause before the strike, the discipline behind the silence, the system that moves without a center, and above all, the conviction that a single, perfectly placed act can shift the weight of the world. That's not fantasy. That's the template. One more fringe story for the road. In a private archive in Istanbul, there's said to be a locked drawer labeled simply Sabr, Arabic for patience. Inside, they say, is a letter addressed to no one, dated 2043. It begins, "We watched your world become fast, and we waited." No confirmation, of course. No sources, just the story. And now you understand. That was always the point. The assassins didn't need to live forever. They just needed us to keep telling their story. And as long as someone, somewhere, believes in the silence before the blade, they still exist. You return one last time to the steps of Alamut. Not the real ones, they're long buried or broken, but the ones in your mind. The ones you've been climbing slowly for hours now, breath by breath, until the whole world smells faintly of dust and rose oil. You're no longer just a visitor here. You're a witness, and witnesses carry weight. The sun is low again, bleeding into the valleys, casting everything in that impossible golden hue that makes even ruins feel sacred. You sit on the edge of a broken wall. Below you, the land sprawls like parchment, folds of ancient geography that once hid empires, now reduced to whispers in guidebooks. And for the first time, the silence doesn't feel ominous. It feels earned. Someone sits beside you. You didn't see them approach. They don't speak. They just hand you a small object, a stone, flat and smooth, with a single mark carved into it. A circle, closed, complete. You ask what it means. The figure shrugs. Depend when you ask. That's the final lesson of Alamut. Not control, not fear, not even belief, but timing. You think back across the entire story. From a child studying languages to the assassin who waited inside a well for 2 days. From women who poisoned with patience to kings who ruled from bunkers of paranoia. From garden myths and fig tree parables to USB drives and encrypted whispers. This wasn't a story about murder. It was a story about moment. One perfect moment, sharpened over years. Wrapped in silence, delivered like scripture. Mainstream historians will keep debating what the order really was, whether Hassan-i Sabbah was a zealot or a genius, whether the Paradise Garden ever existed, whether the kills were acts of faith or cold politics. They'll write essays, dissertations, maybe even novels, and they'll all miss one crucial thing. The order never needed to be understood. It only needed to be felt. And here you are, centuries later, feeling it. You stand, stone in hand, and turn to leave. You look back one last time, not at the ruins, but at the path that led you here. The quiet climb, the whispered names, the weightless fear, the sense that every breath was being watched, not by a god, not by an enemy, but by purpose. A quiet kind of purpose that doesn't need to be loud, or fast, or credited. It just waits. And when the moment comes, it moves. Wind down begins here. The sun is fully set now. The stars begin to blink open above you, like ancient eyes remembering old names. The valley stretches out in slow gradients of blue and black. The voices are gone. The fortress sleeps. And so should you. Let the stone drop from your hand. Let the myths uncoil gently in your mind. No longer sharp, no longer heavy. You've walked through centuries tonight. Through shadowed gardens and forgotten staircases. Through fears you didn't know had names and silences that held more weight than swords. Let them go. Breathe deep. Let the wind and the high mountain pines carry away the questions. Let your heartbeat fall into rhythm with the patience of stone. Because here, at the edge of legend, nothing rushes. Nothing shouts. Everything waits. Everything watches. And everything eventually fades into sleep.